They took my hearing aids the same week they took my house key, and I think that tells you everything about the kind of people my daughter had led into our family. I remember the exact moment I understood what my life had become. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was standing in what used to be my sunroom, the room where I'd grown African violets for 31 years, where my husband Walter used to read the paper in his cracked leather chair, where I'd rocked all 3 of my grandchildren to sleep before their mothers even trusted me to hold them upright. Now there was a cot against the wall, a space heater with a frayed cord, and a bucket in the corner because the connecting bathroom had been repurposed into a home gym for my son-in-law, Craig. I was standing there when Craig turned the deadbolt on the door that led back into the main house. From the outside. "Just for tonight, Eleanor," he said through the glass. "You scared Madison with all that wandering around at 2 a.m. We need everybody to get some sleep." I hadn't been wandering. I'd gotten up to get a glass of water because my mouth was dry from the blood pressure pills, and I'd stood in the hallway for a moment because my knee had locked up the way it does. That was the whole crime. Standing still in a hallway that used to be mine. "Craig," I said, keeping my voice even, "I need my water glass." "There's a pitcher in there," he said, already walking away. "Night, Eleanor. I want to tell you I pounded on that door. I want to tell you I screamed until somebody's conscience cracked open. But I didn't." I sat down on the edge of the cot, and I looked at the window, the one Craig had covered with a sheet of frosted plastic so the neighbors wouldn't see in, he said, though I think the truth was he didn't want them seeing out, seeing me, seeing what this had become. And I thought about my violets, which were dead now, thrown out with the rest of what he called clutter. My name is Eleanor Voss. I am 74 years old, and for a long time I believed that if you raised a child with love, fed them, sacrificed for them, stayed up nights with fevers and heartbreaks and report cards, that child would grow into someone who remembered. I don't believe that anymore. Not because it's never true, but because I lived the exception, and the exception nearly buried me. The house was mine. Mine and Walter's, bought in 1979 with a loan we paid off 11 years early because Walter worked doubles at the plant and I took in alterations on the side, hemming prom dresses and wedding gowns until my fingers cramped into claws by 10 o'clock most nights. Walter died in 2016. Heart sudden, in his sleep, which I have always been grateful for on his behalf and never once forgiven on my own. After that, it was just me and the house and my dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Pepper who slept every night curled against the small of my back like she was guarding a door. My daughter, Renee, is my only child. I loved her before I ever saw her face, the way you do, and I loved her through colic and adolescence and a divorce from her first husband that nearly wrecked us both. When she married Craig 4 years ago, I told myself I was happy for her, and mostly I was. Craig sold insurance and had a laugh that filled up a room and called me Mom before Renee had even asked him to. I liked that foolishly. I liked being called Mom by a man who would later lock me behind a door with a bucket in the corner. The trouble started, as trouble like this always does, with a fall. I broke my hip in the fall of that first year they were married, slipping on ice I should have salted better. 6 weeks in rehab. Renee visited every day and Craig came sometimes too, bringing me magazines and those little cups of pudding, and I thought, this is what family is. This is what it means to be taken care of. You shouldn't be alone in that big house anymore, Mom, Renee said one afternoon, holding my hand in the rehab center, her thumb tracing circles on my knuckles the way she used to do as a little girl when she wanted something. "Craig and I have been talking. We could move in with you. Split the bills. Somebody's there if you fall again." It sounded like love. It sounded, God help me, like the answer to a fear I hadn't said out loud to anyone, the fear of dying alone on a kitchen floor with nobody to find me for days. "There's just some paperwork," Craig said, a week later, setting a folder on my hospital tray with the same casual tone you'd use to mention the weather. "Power of attorney, in case anything happens again. And this, it's just so I can help manage the property taxes and insurance while you're recovering. Puts my name on with yours. Nothing changes for you." I was on painkillers. I was frightened and grateful and so very tired, and my daughter was sitting right there nodding, wearing the cardigan I'd knitted her the Christmas she turned 16, the one with the button she'd never bothered to fix, and I thought, my own daughter would not let me sign away my life. I signed. I did not read every line. I want to say that plainly, because I think somewhere people believe a woman my age who gets swindled must have been careless, must have deserved a little of what came after. I was not careless. I was recovering from surgery, medicated, and trusting a man my daughter loved. That is not the same thing as careless. That is the exact vulnerability that men like Craig go looking for. By the time I understood what I'd signed, it was a full transfer. Not power of attorney. A quitclaim deed, moving the house from my name into a trust with Craig as sole trustee for estate planning purposes, the notary's stamp pressed into the corner like a period at the end of a sentence I never got to write myself. It didn't happen all at once, the way a robbery does. It happened the way water gets into a foundation, slow, quiet, until one day you notice the whole structure has shifted and you can't remember which crack came first. First it was small things. Craig reorganizing the kitchen so I couldn't find my own pans. Then he decided the guest room, my sewing room, technically, though I hadn't sewn much since my hands got bad, would make a better office, and could I move my machine and fabric bins out to the garage? Then the garage flooded one spring and ruined half of it. 40 years of patterns and notions, gone, and nobody apologized, because by then I had stopped expecting anyone to. Then came Madison, my granddaughter, 16 and sharp-tongued in a way that might have been funny in someone else's house. She started calling me the tenant, as a joke that wasn't really a joke. She'd walk past me in the hallway and say, "Oh, sorry, didn't see you. You kind of blend into the wallpaper now," and laugh, and I would smile, because what else do you do? What else does a grandmother do when the child she used to rock through thunderstorms looks at her like a stain on the carpet? Then came the sunroom. "It's just temporary," Renee said, the day they moved my bed out there, while we redo the master bath. "You'll love the light in here, Mom. Remember how much you loved your violets?" The violets did not survive the move. Neither, really, did I, not the version of me that still believed my daughter was protecting me from something rather than delivering me to it. The temporary became permanent within a season. The sheet went up over the window. The lock went on the door, for safety, Craig said, so you don't wander at night and fall again. A camera appeared above the door frame, aimed inward, so that Craig could check on me, he said, though I noticed it also caught the little kitchenette they'd installed for me instead of letting me use the real one. A hot plate, a mini fridge, a microwave that hummed like a dying bee. My meals came on a tray, left outside a door that locked from the other side. Some nights hot. Most nights not. I learned to eat quickly before things cooled entirely, the way you learn anything when the alternative is going without. And, through all of it, I had Pepper. She slept against my back every night in that cot the way she had in my old bed, and when Craig raised his voice at me through the door, which he did, more and more, especially after a couple of beers, Pepper would plant herself at the crack and bark, sharp and furious. 12 pounds of pure defiance standing between me and a man 300 times her size. I used to think that dog had more spine than every adult in that house combined, myself included. They took her on a Thursday. I'd gone to use the bathroom they still let me access during the day, and when I came back, her leash was gone from its hook. Tyler, no, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Madison told me, actually, smirking the way she'd learned to smirk from her father. Dad gave the dog away. Said she was aggressive. Bit somebody's ankle or whatever. Pepper had never bitten anyone in her life. Pepper barked at bad men. That was her whole crime, same as mine. I asked Craig where she'd gone. He said, a farm upstate. Room to run. You should be happy for her. I have heard that particular lie my whole life, dressed up in different clothes. She deserved better. It's for the best. You should be grateful, and every time, it has meant the same thing. Someone took something that was mine and decided my grief about it was an inconvenience to them. That night was the night they locked the sunroom door and left me without water, and that was the night I stopped believing anything would change unless I changed it myself. I want to be honest about something. I did not have a plan that first night. I did not lie awake plotting revenge like some woman in a paperback. I lay on that cot in the dark and I cried, quietly, the kind of crying you do when you don't want the sound of it to give anyone satisfaction. I cried for Walter, who would have burned that house down around Craig's ears before he let this happen. I cried for Pepper, wherever she was, hopefully warm, hopefully not frightened. I cried, mostly, for the woman I used to be, a woman who ran a household, negotiated with fabric suppliers, once talked a bank manager into refinancing our mortgage at a better rate through sheer force of will, and who had somehow let herself be reduced to a body on a cot, waiting for a tray of cold food. Somewhere in that crying, though, something else showed up. Not hope, exactly. Hope had gotten too expensive. Something more like anger that had finally cooled down enough to think clearly, the way a fever breaks and leaves you shaky but lucid. In the morning, I did what I have done my whole life when I don't know what to do next. I made a list. I didn't have paper, not really, not anything they hadn't taken from me, but I had a receipt from the pharmacy in the pocket of my cardigan, and I had a pencil stub I'd smuggled out of Madison's old school supplies years ago and never gave back. On the back of that receipt, in handwriting so small it looked like a secret, I wrote 2 columns. What they took. My house. My key. My dog. My hearing aids, which Craig said needed servicing 3 weeks ago and never returned. My mail, which I later learned had been redirected to a P.O. box in Craig's name. My privacy. My name on the deed. My daughter, in every way that mattered. What they forgot I still had. My memory, which was fine, whatever Craig implied to the contrary. A best friend from church choir, 40 years running, who happened to be a retired paralegal. A neighbor 2 doors down who'd known me since before Renee was born and still waved every morning through whatever gap she could find in that plastic sheeting. A pension that was still, as far as I knew, being deposited into an account I hadn't been allowed to check in months. And a body that, despite the bad hip, still worked well enough to walk to the end of the block and back. I folded the receipt into the lining of my slipper and I began. The first walk I took, the day after they'd locked the door, was really just to the mailbox at the end of the drive. I hadn't been allowed that far in weeks. Craig had started saying it wasn't safe for me to be outside without supervision, though the truth, I think, was that he didn't want the neighbors getting a good look at me and asking questions. Mrs. Alvarez was out watering her hydrangeas when I made it to the sidewalk, moving slower than I used to, my cane tapping an uneven rhythm against the concrete. She straightened up fast when she saw me, hose still running, water pooling around her sneakers. "Eleanor," she said, and there was something in her voice, not pity, which I couldn't have stood, but recognition, the way you say a name when you're relieved a suspicion turns out to be true. "I haven't seen you in months. We've been worried, Frank and I. We asked your daughter, and she said you were staying with her sister in Ohio." "I don't have a sister. I never have." "I don't have a sister," I said. Mrs. Alvarez turned off the hose. I didn't tell her everything, not that day. Some instinct, old and animal, told me to be careful, to gather my footing before I said too much to too many people, because if word got back to Craig before I was ready, he would tighten the leash rather than loosen it. But I told her enough. I told her I needed a phone. I told her, if it wasn't too much trouble, that I could use a ride to the library sometime, and could she please not mention to my daughter that she'd seen me. She didn't ask why. She just nodded, the way a person nods when they've already guessed the shape of the answer and don't need it spelled out. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 9 o'clock. I'll be right here. Sadie Kowalski had been my closest friend since we were 17 years old, singing alto next to each other in the church choir loft, passing notes during the sermon that we were both too old, even then, to be passing. She'd gone on to work 30 years as a paralegal for a firm downtown, and though we drifted the way old friends sometimes do, not from any falling out, just from the ordinary erosion of years and grandchildren and busy lives, I knew. The way you know some things without needing proof, that if I called her, she would answer. I called her from the payphone outside the library, the last one left in 3 counties as far as I knew, using quarters Mrs. Alvarez had pressed into my palm without comment. "Eleanor Voss," Sadie said, when I told her who was calling, and I heard the smile crack open in her voice even through the static. "I have been wondering when you'd finally call me. Renee told everybody at the reunion you'd gone half deaf and half senile and didn't want visitors." I told her that didn't sound like the woman I knew. I'm not deaf, I said. They took my hearing aids. And I am not senile. I am furious, which I understand can look similar from a distance. There was a pause on the line, and then Sadie's voice came back different, flatter, more careful, the voice I imagined she used 30 years ago when a client told her something that mattered. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the fall. I told her everything. The quitclaim deed. The sunroom. The lock. The tray of food, hot some nights and cold most. Pepper. The camera above the door. It took 40 minutes and every quarter Mrs. Alvarez had given me, and by the end of it, Sadie was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, she finally said, what they've done to you has a name. Several names, actually. Undue influence. Elder financial. Abuse. False imprisonment, if that lock is doing what I think it's doing. This isn't a family disagreement. This is a crime, and I am going to help you prove it. I hadn't cried since that first night in the sunroom. I cried then, standing at a payphone outside a library, an old woman in a cardigan with a broken button, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, it didn't feel like grief. It felt like relief. Over the following weeks, I built my case the way I used to build a wedding dress, one careful seam at a time, checking my work twice before moving on, because a mistake caught early costs you an afternoon, but a mistake caught late costs you the whole garment. Sadie helped me request a certified copy of the deed transfer from the county recorder's office, and there it was in black and white, my signature, shaky from painkillers, dated the same week I'd been recovering from hip surgery under heavy medication. No independent witness, no separate counsel advising me, exactly the pattern Sadie said the courts had seen 100 times before and had a name for. I found the redirected mail. Sadie helped with that too, a call to the post office that revealed a change of address form filed in my name, though I hadn't filed it. Sending my mail to a P.O. box Craig had opened without telling me. My pension statements had been going there for 8 months. My bank had sent 3 separate letters about unusual account activity that I had never seen because Craig had seen them first. Mrs. Alvarez, it turned out, had more than watering cans up her sleeve. Her husband Frank had a doorbell camera pointed almost directly at our shared property line, and in its memory, going back 90 days, more than enough, was footage of Craig walking Pepper down the driveway toward a stranger's car. Footage that showed no farm upstate, no room to run, just a woman I didn't recognize handing Craig cash through a roll-down window and driving off with my dog in the passenger seat. Sadie said that alone, paired with what Craig had told me, might qualify as theft of property, setting aside entirely how it felt. And then there was Emma. Emma worked the counter at the copy shop near the library, 19 or 20, always chewing gum. She thought nobody noticed, and she was the one who found the video. I think this might be your grandson, she said one afternoon, turning her phone toward me, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if showing me was a kindness or a cruelty. It's got, like, 40,000 views. It wasn't Tyler, my grandson, in the video. I should say now, for the sake of the record, that Tyler was 15 and had nothing to do with any of this, had in fact once slipped a granola bar under the sunroom door when nobody was looking. God bless that boy. It was Madison. She'd filmed me 2 weeks earlier through the frosted plastic sheeting, a crack she must have found or made herself, catching me on one of the days I hadn't been given water and had gone looking for the kitchen tap, confused and unsteady, my hair uncombed. Talking to myself the way I sometimes do now, an old habit that used to be harmless and now looked, on camera, like exactly the kind of evidence Craig wanted the world to see. POV, when Grandma thinks she still lives here, the caption read. The comments were the kind of casual cruelty the internet specializes in, people who had never met me deciding, in a few keystrokes, that I was a punchline, that I belonged somewhere out of sight. That my confusion was comedy rather than the direct result of being denied water, medication, and my own hearing aids for weeks at a time. I asked Emma if she could save it. Print it if she was able, comments and all. I'm so sorry, she said, and I believed her, because she was the only person under 30 who had looked at that video and seen a woman rather than content. I folded the printout and put it in the envelope with everything else. It was, Sadie told me later, one of the most damning pieces of the whole case, not because of what it showed me doing, but because of what it revealed about the household that had filmed it, laughed at it, and posted it for strangers to enjoy. I want to tell you I felt triumphant, building that case, but mostly I felt tired in a new way. Not the tired of being trapped, but the tired of a woman doing hard, careful work she knows matters. Every morning I woke on that cot and told myself, one seam at a time. I did not slam doors. I did not confront Craig in the hallway the way some angrier version of myself might have wanted to. I smiled at the tray of food, hot or cold, and I said thank you, because a woman gathering evidence cannot afford to look like a woman gathering evidence. The turning point came on a Sunday morning in May, 3 months after the sunroom door had first locked behind me. Sadie had arranged for 2 people to be present that day, a caseworker from Adult Protective Services named Mr. Okafor, calm and thorough in the way of a man who had seen every version of this story and still hadn't lost the capacity to be angry on someone else's behalf, and a deputy from the county sheriff's office. Because Sadie said it was better to have someone with authority present than to rely on Craig's better nature, which by that point none of us believed existed. I asked Mrs. Alvarez to call them at exactly 9:15, time to when Craig would be out back washing his truck, a Sunday ritual as reliable as church, hose in one hand, coffee in the other, radio playing through the open garage door. I wanted him startled, not staged. I wanted the truth to walk up the driveway while he still had suds on his hands. I watched through the crack in the plastic sheeting as the deputy's car pulled in, followed by Mr. Okafor's sedan, followed, a moment later, by Sadie's old green Buick. Because she had told me flatly that she was not missing this for anything short of her own funeral. Craig's face, when the deputy explained why they were there, went through several colors I don't have good words for. Renee came out of the house in her robe, and I heard her say my name, not with tenderness, but with the particular alarm of someone realizing a story she'd been telling herself was about to collapse in front of witnesses. She's fine, Craig kept saying. She's confused. She wanders. We've been taking care of her. Sir, the deputy said, we have a certified copy of a deed transfer signed by Mrs. Voss 3 days after major surgery, with no independent counsel present. We have documentation of a locked exterior door on a room she's been living in. We have records of mail redirected without her authorization. And we have video, obtained separately, of a dog being sold from this property that Mrs. Voss reports as stolen. I'd like to speak with her directly, please, and I'd like that door unlocked now. They unlocked the door. I walked out of the sunroom on my own 2 feet, my cane in one hand and Sadie's arm under the other, and I want you to know that I did not look at Craig when I passed him. I looked at Renee. I loved you before you had a name, I told her. I am so sorry that wasn't enough to keep you from doing this to me. But it was never going to make me disappear. She cried. I did not comfort her. I had spent 30 years comforting that woman through every hurt she'd ever had, real or invented, and I had nothing left in me that morning but the truth and my own 2 feet, carrying me out a door that should never have had a lock on it in the first place. The legal process, once it started properly, moved slower than I would have liked and faster than Sadie warned me it might. There was a civil suit to reverse the deed transfer, built on the undue influence claim, and it helped enormously that Adult Protective Services had opened its own file the same week, which meant Craig was fighting 2 fronts at once instead of one. There was, separately, a criminal referral for the locked door and the withheld medication, my blood pressure pills, it turned out, had been forgotten far more often than any accident could explain, and my doctor's records, once subpoenaed, told their own quiet story about a patient whose numbers had crept dangerously high during exactly the months I'd been in that room. Craig hired a lawyer who tried, for a while, to argue that I had willingly signed the deed and willingly agreed to the living arrangement, that any confusion in my behavior was simply age catching up with me. That argument fell apart the day the judge watched Madison's video, the one meant to humiliate me, and asked, in open court, why a family that claimed to be lovingly caring for an elderly relative had also found it entertaining to film her disorientation for strangers on the internet. Nobody had a good answer to that. There isn't one. The deed was reversed within 4 months. The house came back to me, on paper and eventually in fact, though I'll admit I did not particularly want to live in it again right away. Too many rooms had someone else's fingerprints on them now. Too many memories had been rewritten in that plastic-sheeted sunroom. Sadie, who understood without my having to explain it, helped me find a small apartment in a senior community across town instead, bright and warm, with a kitchen I control myself and a door that locks only from the inside. I did sell the house, eventually, 6 months later, once I was steady enough to walk through it without flinching. I used part of the money to set up a small fund at the local Adult Protective Services office, not enormous. I'm not a wealthy woman, but enough to help pay for a locksmith or a lawyer's retainer for some other Eleanor somewhere. Some other woman standing in a hallway at 2 in the morning being told she's imagining things. Renee and Craig divorced within the year, not because of me directly, Sadie said, though I imagine watching your husband nearly go to prison over your mother has a way of clarifying a marriage one way or another. Renee reached out twice. The first time, I didn't answer. The second time, months later, I let the call go through, and we talked for 11 minutes, carefully, like two people stepping onto ice they aren't sure will hold. It is not fixed between us. I don't know that it will ever be fully fixed. But it is, for the first time in years, honest, and honest is a place you can at least stand on, even if it isn't warm. Madison, to my genuine surprise, was the one who found Pepper. She tracked down the woman from the driveway footage through some corner of the internet I don't fully understand, some app for people who'd bought and sold pets, and she showed up at my new apartment one Saturday afternoon, 16 years old and visibly nervous, holding a leash with a scruffy terrier mix on the other end who took one look at me and started barking so hard her whole back half shook with it. Not the bark of a dog protecting a door this time, but the bark of a dog who'd finally found what she'd been looking for. "I'm sorry," Madison said, standing in my doorway, not quite meeting my eyes. "For the video. For all of it. I don't have a good excuse." "No," I agreed. "You don't. But you found her. That matters." I didn't forgive her that day, not fully, not in the tidy way stories sometimes ask you to. Forgiveness, I've learned at 74, is not a door you walk through once. It's more like weeding a garden. You do it again and again, season after season, and some days the ground gives easily and some days it doesn't give at all. But I let her in. I let her sit on my new sofa and scratch Pepper's ears while the dog groaned with an old, unembarrassed happiness, and I made us both tea, and for 11 minutes, we were just a grandmother and a granddaughter in a small bright apartment, which was more than I had let myself hope for in the sunroom, back when hope had gotten too expensive to afford. I think about Walter sometimes, what he would have made of all this. I think he would have been proud of the paperwork. Honestly, Walter was a details man, kept receipts for everything, would have loved Sadie's certified copies and subpoenaed medical records the way some men love a well-organized toolbox. I think he would have been angrier than I let myself be, at least at first, and I think eventually he would have said what I finally understood myself, that the anger isn't the point. The anger is just the fuel. The point is what you build with it. I am not writing this down for pity, and I am not writing it down as a warning exactly, though if it serves as one, I won't complain. I am writing it down because for a long stretch of months, I was told, in 100 small ways, that I did not matter, that my confusion was funny, that my grief over a stolen dog was an inconvenience, that my whole life's accumulated worth could be folded into a quitclaim deed and signed away while I was too medicated to read the fine print. I believed it, some nights, lying on that cot with the space heater ticking and the plastic sheet rattling faintly against the window frame. I don't believe it anymore. I am 74 years old. I have a dog who sleeps against the small of my back again, guarding a door that finally locks the right way. I have a friend who answered the phone after 5 years of silence like no time had passed at all, because that is what real love looks like, not the kind that asks you to sign something first. And I have, tucked into a drawer in my new apartment, a folded pharmacy receipt with 2 columns of handwriting so small it looks like a secret, which I have never thrown away, because it reminds me that even in a locked room with a bucket in the corner, I was still the same woman who once talked a bank manager into a better rate through sheer force of will. They thought a lock on a door would make me small. They were wrong. It turns out I had been small for a while before that, small in all the ways that let people take a little more each year without my noticing, and it took a locked door, of all things, to finally show me exactly how much space I still deserve to take up in my own life. I'm taking it up now. All of it. Eleanor Voss.